When you look at the gaps in trust, we actually see multiple types of gaps manifesting. Imagine having a performance review where you could evaluate as the employee the performance of the policies within the company. It really does create a dynamic of trust. What if we were to do that as we think about the next 2 years or 5 years? This is an actionable asset. Trust is a vital currency that we need to grow in our companies.
There are certain currencies in life that get you where you're going faster. Trust is one of them, but it's one of those concepts that are really difficult to define. Lots of people want it, but not everyone has it, particularly brands. In this distrustful day and age, I've got Cory Sheer with me, Closing the Trust Gap. You're the author of that. What is the trust gap, Cory?
Well, there are multiple trust gaps. Unfortunately, there are a few that are really rising to the top. The first is the trust gap between the leader and the frontline employee. And what we found from our research is that leaders have a much higher perception of their trustworthiness compared to frontline employees or individual contributors. We've actually dimensionalized that. That gap in trust between those two levels of the organization is on average 31% across all industries, which is a staggering number to think that every day when you're walking into the office, you're operating at about 2/3 of the power that you could be operating at. So that's one gap. The next gap is the overall organization that if you were to measure the actual organizational trustworthiness of a company compared to what they think they are as a whole, that is creating another gap. And then the final gap is just the overall level of trustworthiness between an employee and the leader. And what we found from our research is that 51% of employees do not have a high level of trust for their leaders. 51%. So when you look at the gaps in trust, we actually see multiple types of gaps manifesting. And that is a very significant challenge that affects productivity. It affects retention. It affects profitability. It affects the brand experience of the customers. So this pervasive challenge, what I would call an epidemic of distrust, is something that has to be addressed.
What is causing all of this distrust?
I think there are a lot of factors right now. We talked about in the other episode how we've experienced a collective trauma through the pandemic. We've shifted our way of working with virtual and hybrid and then in-person, our access to technology, AI. These are all kind of evolutionary changes that are occurring at a rapid pace. These are systems level evolutions that are occurring at a really, really quick rate of change. These are all things just in addition to, I think, the economic conditions, depending on where you're at in the world, are also very, very challenging also. Our way of thinking about work is changing underneath us, it seems. And then, of course, when you add in just things like our own ego, that's a pretty significant contributing factor as well. But I would say, the other element that is really critical to address is if there are policies and practices within a company that are not continually evaluated and ensure that they are trustworthy, not just the people of the organization, but also the policies and the practices. If those things are not continually evaluated and made to change within the context of the business, you may have the most trustworthy people ever, but if your policies and practices are not trustworthy internally or to your customers, overall, your level of trust collectively within the company will drop. That's what the research says. So it's not just the realm of people. We also have to have trustworthy policies and practices, procedures, pricing, all of those elements, kind of the nuts and bolts of an organization. Those also have to be trustworthy.
I've never thought of trust as in the policies and procedures, but very often these days you're hearing people have been failed by the company or failed by the system, or they've been let down by something that is not necessarily a person, but the judicial system, the education system. We've been let down by the government. So this speaks to the policies, procedures that you're talking about, the processes. So just unpack that a little bit. What kind of things are you talking about with a policy that would build or undermine trust?
Yeah, as you were talking about that, I was reminded I flew home last night from a business trip, and every single time I get on a plane, I know that there are two people that need to have very, very good days. It's the pilot and the co-pilot.
Yeah.
Everybody else could have a rough day, but I just need the pilot and the co-pilot to have a good day. And they may be the most trustworthy individuals that I have ever met. But if they don't go through the regular routine, if they don't have a system, if they don't have a process by which they are checking their equipment, doing all of the procedures, the protocols, if they're not consistently doing it, it doesn't matter how trustworthy they are. If the system fails, even with trustworthy people that are part of that company, then I'm going to feel the effect of the customer. So if we break it down in the same way that we do in terms of the structure of trust with people, not only do people need to have the 3 building blocks of competency, problem solving, and care for others, it's the same application to policies and practices and procedures. So let's talk about a common policy within the accounting profession. What's just a common policy?
You're asking me what is a common policy?
Yeah, what would be one that kind of rises to the top where it's like that? That is, it's literally it's generally accepted accounting principle, right? Like, what's one of them?
Okay. Well, you've got technical policies and procedures. We serve the client. We deliver accurate data in a timely manner. You've got that stuff. You've also got, I guess, softer things like we treat our clients and staff with respect. We embrace diversity. We engage with the community. So I'm just thinking about, you've caught me on the hop a little bit. I'm thinking about the values and the things that a firm would adhere to.
Yeah. And so that made me think of regarding a financial report or financial reports.
Okay.
Those are financial reports. Those are policy driven. There are procedures, there are processes that go into the creation of sound, trustworthy financial reports, correct?
And that's the holy grail of accounting, isn't it? Accurate information in a risk-free environment. Some of the scandals that we've had with accounting firms have come from inaccurate financial reporting and things not being done well.
That's exactly right. So there is a competency requirement for those types of reports, those types of procedures. So that's critical. And it's very, very technical. That's why accountants are so vital to every organization, is because the level of expertise, the technicality, all of those things, that is the responsibility ultimately of the accountant to ensure that those are being applied correctly from a technical standpoint. So
the knowledge, the tax regulations, all of the legal side of things, you've got to be on top of that. Yes.
It is. And it's a massive competency requirement. And so that's a critical building block. Also, though, if those reports, if those policies they're not solving the problem of the company, or they're not addressing the potential problems that could be occurring, then it's difficult to trust whether or not it's really helpful. Or if people don't understand what the problems are that those reports are solving, addressing, or preventing, if there's the gap between the purpose of that policy and practice or the report versus the understanding of the rest of the people in the organization, I may have zero accounting knowledge, but I just know that I've got to sit in a meeting and talk about this report. If I don't truly understand what problem we're solving or what we're addressing, I'm not going to have a high level of trust. And then the final thing is, this may be a bit more nuanced depending on your context, but the final thing is that if the report process itself, if the unpacking of that data, if the utilization of that data does not demonstrate care for the mission of the organization, if it's just another report, or for example, if it's sent out via email, it's not really unpacked, there's no education, I'm not really invited into a conversation that's strategic, I'm just simply sent the report via an email once a month, I'm not going to feel very cared for by that particular report or that process. And so as a result of that, I'm not going to have a high level of trust. I may trust the competency of it. It may be a bulletproof report and really well done. But if it's not relevant to the problem that I'm trying to solve, if I'm not feeling like I'm invited into a conversation strategically about it, my level of trust is going to continue to go down. So that's why all 3 of those building blocks, competency, problem solving, and care for others, they're applicable for people as well as for policies and practices. And imagine a company that had competency, problem solving, and care for others as much as possible with every team member and every policy and practice. It would be world class. Yeah. And those are the world class companies. They just get it. They do the work comprehensively, not just in terms of technical expertise, but all the way through problem solving and care for others. And those are the brands that we are drawn to the most, that we will pay an exorbitant amount of money for that we will be fiercely loyal to, that we'll be fans of because we have a high level of trust for them.
One of the areas where accounting firms are struggling at the moment is recruitment and possibly retention, because there is a finite number of professionals out there, a growing demand for accounting services. So what happens then is, with attraction of talent becoming an issue, you've got to make your shop window, which is effectively your website, you've got to make that a true reflection of everything you offer people that come and work for you. So we call this employer brand, as you're probably familiar with, is that corporate brand of why our clients come to us. And most accounting firms are doing well. They've got more work than they can handle, by and large, and they've grown profitably even throughout the pandemic. But when it comes to talent, you can put all the things you like on your website. We're a great place to work. We have a terrific culture. We really develop our people. We embrace diversity. We love the community. We get involved in all kinds of great things. But if that's not true, or you can't give evidence that you follow through on that, then you fall down on what you're claiming is the practice or the process or something you do in your firm. Speak to that a little bit.
Well, that's why when we think about those two realms of people and policy and practice, they're not side by side. They're constantly interacting with each other. So if you say all of these things and you put it up on the website, but then when you meet that individual, you just don't have a high level of trust for who they are. You don't feel actually like, for example, if you apply for a job and you get an auto response email, or you have to submit your resume or your Vita, and then you have to just replicate that again through the computer system. Like, these are all things that, because there is a high sensitivity to, if you've got a very competitive work market, you have lots of demand, but not a lot of supply. The consumer, or in this case, the potential future employee, they're going to be highly sensitive to those dynamics. And so because of that, there needs to be a lot of attention spent towards ensuring that everything that you do throughout that recruitment, interview, and then even job offer process, as well as your 90-day onboarding process, it must be as competent as problem solving and demonstrate as much care for others as possible. You must develop trust from the beginning. It's not just about, this is our compensation package, this is our whatever office space, if it's a physical environment. You have to go much deeper than that to really earn and win people's loyalty. Otherwise, they may be hired, but if you don't tend to the trust of the individual or the workplace culture, they've got lots of options. They can go anywhere they want, and they can change their loyalty just like that. So you, in a high demand market where it's fiercely competitive, where a customer really is the next new employee in a highly competitive market, it is a requirement for that organization to be as trustworthy as possible. Otherwise, people will speak with their feet and they will leave.
There's a myriad of policies and processes that are required to run a business these days. I had somebody recently asked their boss if the company had a menopause policy. She was a lady in her 50s and wanted to know how the company catered for menopause issues. And it's a reflection of the world that we're in right now, but there's so many bases that a company, a firm, an employer has to cover right now. So either those policies, procedures are boilerplate, and someone in that company will go to the internet and pull up a menopause policy that somebody has written before, or go to ChatGPT and get something written, or they're going to have to do it from scratch. Whatever way they do it, that's got to be agreed on. So there's some kind of leadership structure or committee that signs off on that. That's where a lot of the problems come from me in saying, okay, well, can we follow through on this? Do we put this out there as one of our practices? And can we adhere to it?
This is where I think being iterative in our policy creation and our policy adherence, having formal, regular opportunities to have deeper dive conversations on the policies that matter most. This is where asking the question of all of the policies that we currently have right now, what is the one that is most concerning to you? What is the one that is causing you pause? What is the one that you trust the least? Are there any gaps in any of our policies currently? Are our policies rooted in the status quo? We're only doing them because we've always done them? Or are they actually moving the organization forward? Are they complementing a positive and trustworthy workplace, or are we simply obligatory and just doing the work because that's what we're told to do? These active conversations must occur. They can occur formally. They can occur through listening sessions. They can occur through outside counsel coming in and doing a policy audit. It can also occur through individual one-on-one conversations or policy, or not policy review, but annual review or quarterly review for performance plans, where you're adding in questions that not just speak to their performance, but also the performance of the company itself. Imagine having a performance review where you could evaluate as the employee the performance of the policies within the company and how that would create really critical dynamic dialogue that would help the organization move forward. Those are simple things that we can implement, but that is a new way of thinking, isn't it, Rob?
We need lots of new ways of thinking. What got us here won't get us there. You think now about the remote working that we've got, needs a whole new way of looking at work. And the way we build culture and the way we handle clients and the way we protect data and the way we nurture and care for our staff. So is this an ever-growing thing where we're going to need more and more policies and procedures and more nuance in these to cover every single scenario? Because we are getting very woke and very sensitive to all the needs of everyone. But can you really cater to that?
I think it depends on the industry. It depends on the environment. I really do, because some vocational contexts there's a higher risk just due to the nature of the work that they do. Generally speaking, though, I don't think it's about creating more policies. I do think that it's about creating more actual conversations around the policies that matter most, and then how are those policies doing. I would say the more simple we can get, the more, I have 4 kids, and I remember when they were younger, we needed a backyard fence. Like, we couldn't just have an open prairie for the kids to go run. And even if we felt like they would probably stay around the house, we knew that they needed some kind of a constraint. However, we didn't build a 50-foot high fence, and we didn't build a fence that was only a quarter of the backyard itself. We built a fence that allowed them to move throughout and to enjoy that current context. And so in the same way within our organizations, we must create the appropriate construct and frame, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we have to have minute, detailed policy for every single activity. But that requires a lot of critical thinking, a lot of consideration. It requires the right voices in the room, and then ultimately it requires an ongoing evaluation. If it's just kind of a set it and forget it approach to policy, it will become outdated very, very quickly, which is why I think a lot of companies struggle with strategic plans, because they do one strategic plan that's going to cover the next 5 years. They never revisit it again. It's not iterative. And so now you've done all of this work, spent all of this money to create this beautiful one-time plan that in 6 months is no longer relevant.
Such a good point. You can't define best practice for the next 5 years. We're in such an uncertain world right now with so many shifting drivers of change that if you get a 12-month plan together, then good luck, you might just hold it for that. Can we speak, Cory, generationally for a moment? The accounting profession is symptomatic of some others where it's an old profession. Yeah, it's been around for 1,000 years, but it's actually ran by the over 50s, if I can be really blunt. All of the firm owners, the managing partners, the people in positions of responsibility, the people with the equity, 75% of them are at or close to retirement age. Now, there are new generations coming through, but if we were to prototype or generalize with these young generations, they don't trust much. They're a little bit more flaky or a little bit less loyal for whatever reasons. And when you're trying to put policies, practices in place for people that could care less about sticking around, or that could care less that you're ticking all the boxes, they will just do their own thing and they don't want to adhere to the rules. How do you deal with that?
That's a great point. I think the younger generation, which I have 4 of them, the younger generation will be fiercely loyal to the truth that aligns with what matters most to them.
Okay.
So they absolutely have the capability of fierce loyalty. The challenge is, how do you ensure that a clear and appropriate definition of our collective truth, our truth moving forward? Another way to put it is, how do we pull all of our generations into a conversation to co-create the future state, the future version of our truth? If that exercise, if that commitment is continual, then it's not about handing the truth that those who have gone before us just moves down the generation. It's really more about, yes, we're certainly taking into context all that have gone before us, and we're grateful for that, but we're in a new world. So how do we co-create? How do we pull the core principles of those truths into this new reality? And then how do we co-create that together? Brene Brown, who's a great author, she said that one of the number one ways to build trust with somebody is to ask them to help you with something. So if I say to you, hey, Rob, I'm really struggling with this. Would you be willing to just take a look at this? It'll take like 5 minutes, but would you be willing to give me your thoughts on this? You would say, of course, I would be happy to help. It's interesting how when we invite people in to helping us solve a complex or challenging problem, it really does create a dynamic of trust. What if we were to do that in terms as we think about, okay, as we think about the next 2 years or 5 years, how do we want to move the organization forward? How do we invite the appropriate voices into the room? How do we co-create a new version of the truth? That's where I believe there's a lot of opportunity.
It's really good. Cory, leave us with some words of inspiration, maybe even some practical advice for the leaders, the managers, the bosses that are in charge, that are holding the cards with the policies and the practices. They want to create a good environment. They want to cover their backs, of course, but they want to nurture and build trust in their firm, their organization. How would you lead them?
How I would lead them is, do you have a clear assessment or understanding of the actual level of trust that is occurring within your company? And that does not have to be overcomplicated. Of course, you can apply. We have an assessment tool that we use. In fact, I just got off of a client call. They've gone through the assessment process, the unpacking of that assessment, the truth of where their workplace culture is regarding trust. She told me, she said, it is amazing what has been occurring over the last 3 weeks. These organic conversations around trust. They've moved trust from something that is ethereal and theoretical to something that is practical and measurable. That shift, that complete change in the way that we think about trust, that's where there is the opportunity for managers and leaders. But the number one opportunity is to first start with ourselves. It's to ask ourselves the question, am I personally, as well as are the policies that I'm leading and running, am I competent? Do I demonstrate that level of technical leadership, communication, project management competence? Am I solving the right problems, not just solving problems? And then finally, the hardest one, am I truly and authentically demonstrating care for those that I'm leading, working with, or working for? If we have a consistent, clear assessment first of ourselves, it becomes much easier to then assess the rest of the organization. If we begin to assess ourselves in that way, we will start to see a change. And that's the hope and the inspiration that I want people to take away from this, is that trust is something that Scott Baradell calls it an actionable asset. It is an actionable asset. That's language that I know rings true for accountants, but this is an asset that you can take action on in order to strengthen and improve. It is a vital currency that we need to grow in our companies.
Amen to that. Cory Sheer, author of Closing the Trust Gap at trustgapbook.com. Been brilliant talking to you today. Thank you for putting trust back on our radar and giving us some practical insights about how we can develop it both organizationally as individuals. We appreciate your insights.
Thank you so much, Rob. It was a privilege.